I did my advocacy paper on the least restrictive environment. The principles of the least restrictive environment are heavily debated throughout the special education field. I believe public schools need to take full responsibility for complying with these laws and regulations by individualizing every placement decision and proactively creating systems that prioritize inclusion with appropriate support and not just physical integration. We can do this by training teachers on inclusive teaching practices and behavior interventions, providing appropriate resources such as staffing and services, emphasizing data-driven progress monitoring, and having regular IEP reviews to discuss reintegration. There are 3 laws that discuss LRE. The first one is the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which states students with disabilities should be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. Movement out of this educational environment should only occur when the nature or severity of the disability of a child is such that education in a regular class with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. ADA discusses LRE to emphasize giving supports to people with disabilities in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of the individual. And Section 504 discusses the need to educate an individual with disabilities in its jurisdiction with persons who are not handicapped to the maximum extent appropriate to the needs of the handicapped person. There are a few opposing arguments, which are really just discussing the benefits of integration and why every student should be integrated. The first is a higher level of social interaction, social acceptance, and friendship. It's a key element in creating a positive school outcome for students with disabilities, and also teaches all students about diversity and creating inclusive communities. In integration, there are higher academic expectations or more educational opportunities. And separation reinforces that special education students are different from their peers and may be incapable of learning with their peers, which could create exclusion. For my supporting arguments, I used 3 different cases. The first was Daniel R.R. versus the State Board of Education, which occurred in 1989. Daniel was a 6-year-old boy with Down syndrome, placed in special education classroom after little to no progress in the general education classroom with the correct accommodations. The court actually ruled in favor of the school district, and this case created a 2-part test. Part 1 asks the schools to determine if the student can be educated in the general education setting with the use of individualized supports and services. And Part 2 asks if the student has been mainstreamed to the maximum extent appropriate. The second situation I used was Oscar, who was a 5th grader with auditory processing disorder. He began having failing grades, increased misbehavior, and he also joined a gang. At one point, he even set fire to a trash can in his classroom. Due to behavior intensifying and not responding to new accommodations and modifications, which included visual learning supports, auditory processing accommodations, extra reviews of major concepts, and opportunities to work with peers in collaborative groups, he was removed from the general education classroom. His team created a reintegration plan for Oscar to earn his way back to the non-disabled peers, which worked. They used the alternative education setting as a tool for Oscar to find success, and this setting should be used as a fluid placement. The third case I used was Aberti versus the Board of Education. Raphael was an 8-year-old boy with Down syndrome. He was placed in a self-contained special education classroom due to challenges with behavior and academics. And in this case, they actually ruled in favor of the family. The court emphasized the need for every student to be seen as a student who can be educated in the general education setting with the correct supports. A change of placement can only be discussed after serious efforts have been made to include the child in the general education setting. In conclusion, failing to implement the proposed solutions, including data-driven placement decisions, regular IEP reviews, professional development, and individualized reintegration plans, risks violating students' rights under IDEA Section 504 and ADA. Many times, placement decisions are based on available staffing, student disability, or lack of training instead of what is best for the individual student. Using these for placement decisions contradicts the federal law and can result in a lack of success and harm for the student. Every IEP team should ask themselves if the student's educational setting is allowing the child to find success and thrive in their environment. When schools take this decision seriously, they will not only be complying with the law, but also helping their students find success. I would love to hear any questions or comments anybody has. What is your stance on removing students from the general education classroom?